Welcome, subscribe to the channel, new stories every day, and now let's get started. My name is Morgan Huntley, and I used to believe with all my heart that love, once forged, would last forever. I was certain that when I said I do to Adrian 9 years ago, we had a bond that no hardship could break. We met as college sophomores, wide-eyed and eager to devour everything life threw our way. He was the life of every gathering, the kind of man who could strike up an effortless conversation with anyone, from professors to strangers at a coffee shop. I was quieter, the observer in the corner who found him endlessly fascinating. Yet somewhere along the way, the bond that once glowed so brightly dimmed. And here I am today, hunched over my laptop in our modest living room, writing down the story of my unraveling marriage. I'm hoping perhaps that in putting this out there, wherever there might be, I'll find clarity, absolution, or maybe just the courage to face the consequences of everything I've done. Our early days, when Adrian and I first started dating, we were inseparable. We bonded over late-night pizzas in our dorm lounge, the joy of skipping 8 a.m. lectures together, and the thrill of discovering each other's odd quirks. He loved my penchant for reading historical fiction, and I adored how he could make anything into a lively debate, politics, sports, or the best topping for bagels. By our senior year, we were basically living together in an off-campus apartment, sharing space and routine. He proposed to me in that same apartment's tiny kitchen, sliding a modest ring onto my finger with shaky hands. I said yes without a second thought, tears in my eyes, convinced that this man was my soulmate, someone who would protect my heart as fiercely as I would protect his. Fast forward to the present. We've been married 8 years now. We never had children. Maybe because we were too busy, or maybe because deep down, I sensed that bringing a child into the swirl of our issues might complicate things even more. We moved to a small house in a suburban neighborhood, complete with well-manicured lawns, friendly neighbors, and the typical white fence scenario. It's the sort of place where families thrive, where you'd expect to see kids riding bikes along the sidewalk. But inside our house, something broke, or maybe it just drifted away. Adrian and I devolved from that spontaneous, passionate couple into two people who shared bills, chores, and half-hearted goodnight kisses. We rarely made time for each other. Our date nights dwindled to once every few months, a mechanical attempt to salvage something that felt inert. The tension simmered quietly. We argued over trivial matters, laundry left in the dryer too long, the dinner he didn't like, the groceries I forgot to buy. And every time, I noticed the lines around Adrian's eyes deepen as if each fight was carving new worries into his face. I suppose mine did the same, but I was too lost in my own sadness to notice. Meeting Nolan. I was at a networking event downtown, a state affair in a fancy hotel conference room. A friend had invited me, suggesting it might help me get out of the house since I'd been feeling low. Adrian knew I was going but didn't seem especially interested in the details. He never asked who I'd be with or how late I might stay, and that lack of curiosity cut me more deeply than I'd ever admit. I stood by the buffet table, sipping on lukewarm coffee and making small talk with a few strangers. Then I noticed him, Nolan Cordell. I'd briefly encountered him at a community business workshop the year before, but we'd never had a real conversation. He was tall, lean, and carried himself with an easy grace that suggested confidence without arrogance. He recognized me first, Morgan Wright, he asked, stepping closer. We met at that workshop about digital marketing last year. I nodded, a half-smile forming on my lips. That's right. You have an incredible memory. He shrugged casually. I remember interesting people. That line, as simple as it was, made me feel seen at a time when I felt nearly invisible. We spoke for a while, small talk about our jobs and how tedious networking events could be. But underneath the polite conversation, I felt a flicker of interest, a tiny spark I hadn't felt in years. When he asked for my number, I gave it to him without hesitation, telling myself it was purely professional. I even repeated it silently in my head, purely professional. I'm married. From text to something more, looking back, I can't pinpoint the exact moment our texting turned into flirting. At first, Nolan would share an interesting article or funny meme, and I'd reply with a polite thanks. But soon, those messages came at night, when Adrian worked late or when I found myself awake in bed, wishing for a conversation that wasn't about errands or chores. Nolan, 10:42 p.m. Can't sleep. Too many thoughts swirling. How's your night going, Morgan? Me, 10:43 p.m. Same here, just feeling restless. It escalated from there. We began sharing personal stories, our vulnerabilities, our frustrations with life. Nolan confessed he'd ended a long-term relationship a year ago and was still healing. I confessed that Adrian and I were drifting. We never labeled what we were doing as emotional cheating, but in hindsight, it absolutely was. My heart would race whenever my phone vibrated, and I'd sneak away to text him back, terrified Adrian would notice. But Adrian rarely did notice. Night after night, he'd be glued to his laptop, working or catching up on sports recaps. I doubt he suspected anything. Our bedroom turned into a place for sleeping, not connecting. The first time it happened, Nolan eventually asked me out to grab coffee in a less formal setting than those networking events. I justified it to myself. It's just coffee. That's not wrong, right? But I knew it was more than that. We met at a quiet cafe near the river, the kind that played soft jazz in the background. I wore my favorite burgundy sweater, feeling strangely excited to see him. We talked for 2 hours straight about everything from the favorite spots we discovered in the city to our complicated childhoods. It felt exhilarating to open up to someone new, to feel that sense of possibility. I realized how lonely I'd been when I found myself smiling, truly smiling, for the first time in months. When we left the cafe, I offered him a brief hug goodbye. It was meant to be friendly, but that quick embrace lingered. Our faces were inches apart, and I felt his breath on my cheek. Time seemed to slow. I think we both knew what was about to happen, but I still felt a jolt of surprise when his lips met mine. The kiss was short, almost tentative, but it left me reeling. I pulled back quickly, my heart hammering. I have to go, I mumbled, turning on my heel and practically running to my car. I drove around aimlessly, tears streaking my cheeks. My mind raced. I was married, and I just kissed another man. But that guilt came hand in hand with an undeniable rush of, well, excitement. A part of me wanted more. The guilt and the lies. I was a wreck that night. Adrian barely looked up from his spreadsheets when I got home, and part of me wanted to scream. Asked me how my day was. Noticed me. But I just stood there, my purse still slung over my shoulder, and watched him type away until he gave me a distracted smile. Hey, Moore, he said. Long day? I swallowed, forcing a weak nod. Yeah, it was. I'm going to shower. He nodded, returning to his work without another word. And as I stood under the hot water, I whispered to myself over and over, this can never happen again. But never became an empty word. Days turned into weeks, and that kiss morphed into a full-blown affair. We'd sneak in lunches, then dinners, and eventually nights at Nolan's place, a small apartment with vintage movie posters on the walls. Each time I told myself it would be the last. Each time I felt a deep pang of guilt, mingled with the relief of being seen and valued by someone. Adrian noticed something off about me. He once asked why I seemed distant, why I wasn't sleeping well. But I brushed it off, blaming stress at work. He believed me, or at least he pretended to. We never talk about it in depth. Confiding in Theo. One afternoon, my longtime friend Thea invited me to her house for lunch. She's known me since we were 14, which means she can sense when something's wrong even if I don't say a word. We sat at her kitchen table, the scent of homemade soup wafting around us, and she studied me with those sharp green eyes of hers. Morgan, she said gently, what's going on? You look like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. I had opened my mouth to deny it, but no sound came out. Suddenly, tears I hadn't realized I was holding back began to spill over. Thea's face softened in concern, and she reached across the table to take my hand. I spent the next hour telling her everything, my stale marriage, my sense of suffocation, and the months of drifting. Finally, I explained what had happened with Nolan. It felt both horrifying and liberating to say it out loud. Thea was silent throughout, letting me speak until I was emotionally spent. Morg, she said quietly, I'm not judging you. But you know this can't go on. You either have to tell Adrian or end it with Nolan, or both. You're only going to hurt yourself and everyone else more if you keep dragging it out. I nodded, my eyes puffy from crying. I know, but what if Adrian hates me? What if we can't fix it? What if this is just proof I'm not in love with him anymore? Thea squeezed my hand. That's a question only you can answer. But you need to do something. Living a double life is no way to exist. The night I met Ian, you'd think that Thea's advice would have steeled my resolve, that I'd either break things off with Nolan or finally tell Adrian. But here's where I dug myself into a deeper pit. About a month after that conversation, I went to a small get-together at a mutual friend's house. Thea's brother Ian was there, visiting from out of state. Ian and I had history, not romantic, but we'd always gotten along well. In high school, he was the older, cooler brother who sometimes gave us rides when Thea's parents weren't around. We drifted apart over the years, but seeing him again brought back a wave of familiarity. That night, I was feeling vulnerable. Adrian and I had a spat earlier in the day about finances, and I left the house feeling unappreciated and alone. After a few too many glasses of wine, I ended up spilling my troubles to Ian in the quiet corner of the backyard. He listened intently, a look of sympathy etched on his face. You deserve to be happy, Morgan, he said softly. You always seemed so full of life back then. Where did that go? I shrugged, tears prickling my eyes again. I don't know. Maybe I just lost it along the way, trying to hold things together. He put an arm around me in a comforting gesture. I shouldn't have let it happen, but I was too raw, too confused. One thing led to another, and before I could process it, we were locked in a passionate kiss that escalated faster than I ever expected. It was almost like I was on autopilot, fueled by a need to feel something beyond the dull ache that was my marriage. We ended up in a spare bedroom, the music from the party muffled by the walls. I remember coming to my senses after a tangled mess of limbs, my mind screaming at me, "What have you done?" I parted ways with Ian in utter shame. He looked equally stunned, perhaps realizing we'd stepped over a line that we could never erase. Torn between guilt and confession. So there I was, two affairs in a matter of months, Nolan and Ian, and a husband who remained clueless. My guilt was crippling. At night, I'd lie awake listening to Adrian's soft breathing, wondering if I should just tell him everything. Thea's words haunted me. Nolan's affections felt overshadowed by the new guilt from hooking up with Ian. I was drowning in secrets. Adrian, for his part, seemed increasingly concerned. He'd asked me if I was happy, if there was something we needed to work on. Each time I dodged or responded with a half-truth. "Adrian, Morgan, talk to me. You've been so distant. I want to help." "Me? I'm just tired, Adrian. Work's been crazy." He'd sigh, unsure whether to push further or let me be. The truth was, neither of us knew how to fix something we hadn't been honest about for so long. Confession to Nolan. In an attempt to sort out my feelings, I asked Nolan to meet at the same quiet cafe where we'd first kissed. I arrived early, nerves gnawing at my stomach. When he came in, he gave me a small smile that turned to worry once he saw my expression. We sat opposite each other, ignoring the pastry display and the background chatter. "Nolan, there's something I need to tell you," I said, voice trembling. He reached out, covering my hands with his. "Whatever it is, you can tell me. I'm here." I drew a shaky breath. I slept with someone else. His hands stiffened on mine. For a moment, I thought he might pull away, but he stayed still. "When?" he asked quietly. "About a week ago," I confessed, feeling the sting of tears. "It was at a party. I had too much to drink and I messed up." He looked down at our joined hands, then slowly freed his fingers and leaned back, crossing his arms. "Messed up? Like how we did? Or was this just, I don't know, Morgan? I thought we had something, well, special. As messed up as it might be, I thought you and I closed my eyes. I'm sorry, Nolan. It's all a mess. I don't know what I'm doing anymore." He was silent for what felt like forever. Eventually, he let out a resigned sigh. "You need to figure out what you want. If you're just bored or confused, you're going to keep hurting people, including yourself." That comment stung, but he was right. Deep down, I knew it. Writing it all down. That same evening, I tried again to talk to Adrian, but he had a stressful day at work and looked exhausted. I couldn't bring myself to dump my confession on him. Instead, I found myself in the living room, laptop on my knees, typing furiously. I started writing everything. Our backstory, my feelings of drifting away, the affairs with Nolan and I, and my guilt, my confusion, and the question that nagged at me the most: had I simply fallen out of love with Adrian? I decided to share this confession online, anonymously. Maybe I hoped that strangers could see a path forward or offer me some guidance that I couldn't get from Thea or from my own conscience. I wrote about the times I felt invisible in my own marriage. I wrote about the adrenaline rush of being wanted by someone new, how it made me feel alive after so many years of routine. And I wrote about how all that excitement was overshadowed now by a darkness in my chest, a suffocating guilt that threatened to consume me. The crossroads. So here I am, at a crossroads. Part of me wants to gather my courage, face Adrian, and tell him the entire truth, that I haven't been faithful, that I might not love him the way I once did, and that I have made a series of terrible choices in my desperation to feel connected again. That conversation would likely end our marriage or at least plunge us into a painful period of separation and counseling. I'm terrified of that outcome, of losing everything we built, even if we built it on shaky ground. Another part of me wants to sweep everything under the rug, break it off with Nolan and Ian, and pretend that none of this ever happened. But I know that's impossible. I changed. We changed. I can't unsee the cracks in our foundation. I can't pretend there isn't a part of me that has maybe just drifted away from Adrian forever. I replay potential scenarios in my mind. I tell Adrian everything, and he leaves. I might find myself living in a small apartment, forced to start from scratch, grappling with regret and heartbreak. I tell Adrian everything, and we try marriage counseling, opening up old wounds. Maybe we rediscover why we fell in love, or maybe we confirm that love died long ago. I stay silent and break it off with Nolan and Ian quietly. But then I live with the guilt, a secret that might surface later. A ticking time bomb in my marriage. I walk away from it all, divorce Adrian without telling him why, vanish from Nolan's and Ian's lives, and try to forge a new existence somewhere else. But that path feels cruel and selfish, leaving a trail of confusion and hurt. None of these feel right. None feel easy. I wish there were a fifth option, something that would let me keep the best of all worlds and shed the guilt like an old coat. But life doesn't work that way, does it? Plea for advice, and so I'm putting my confession into words, sending it out, hoping that someone might read it and say the magic phrase that makes everything click. I've run out of excuses for my behavior. I know cheating is wrong. I know I should have fought for my marriage or left it with honesty rather than betraying it. But I also know I'm only human, confused, lonely, desperate for connection. If you're reading this, I ask you, is falling out of love a legitimate reason to break every vow you've made? Or is it a sign that I should have ended things honorably before stepping into territory that would devastate Adrian if he ever finds out? Am I truly out of love with him, or did I just let resentment fester until it pushed me into the arms of others? Right now, I'm staring at a half-packed suitcase in my bedroom, one I started filling in a moment of panic, thinking I might flee to a hotel for a few nights. But I couldn't bring myself to leave. Adrian is in the kitchen making dinner, seemingly oblivious to the storm raging inside me. In a few minutes, I'll close this laptop, take a deep breath, and face in with a forced smile. Yet tomorrow or next week or maybe next month, I'll have to decide. Tell them or not, stay or go. That's the end of my story for now. It feels incomplete because it is. The next chapter depends on a choice I'm terrified to make. I suppose the one thing I've learned is that no matter how numb or neglected you might feel in a relationship, betrayal isn't a path to a neat solution. It's a bomb that goes off eventually. The only question is how many people get hurt in the blast. So if anyone out there can read these words and see something I can't, please tell me. Do I love my husband deep down? Is my behavior just a cry for help? Or have I already moved beyond saving, doomed to turn this marriage into a casualty of my own discontent? I may not have the courage to answer Adrian honestly tonight, but I'm hoping that by seeking advice, by writing this all out, I'll find the spark I need to face the truth, because I can't keep living in a state of denial, carrying this guilt like a millstone around my neck. One thing's for certain. Everything changes once I confess or once I decide I can't. Either I'll burn every bridge behind me or I'll walk a new path toward rebuilding. And in the quiet spaces of my mind, I wonder which outcome I truly want. All I can do is keep breathing, keep writing, and pray that I figure out the answer before the walls come crashing down around me.